I was reading about larger breeds of dogs the other day. One of the points made was that temperament tends to be more mellow because of an understanding of their physical power. They don't feel as threatened by the world around them, so they take a less defensive stance. This comes with maturity, but that is accelerated even when compared with smaller dogs with similar lifespans. Larger dogs tend to live on the shorter side. This kind of lesson is similar to that of the Ultraverse's Prime. Surprise! This is another Superman analog thread. So Prime was a 90s character who was very Shazam/Captain Marvel inspired. He was a 13-year-old boy who could excrete a fluid that he could reshape into a carapace that enabled him to take on superhuman traits, basically like a body horror version of Captain Marvel. Prime was part of the Ultraverse imprint of Malibu comics that ran in the early 90s. This was an independent studio at the time, but eventually the company was acquired by Marvel Comics in order to gain access to their advancements in coloring technology, and the characters were all folded into their portfolio. While this resulted in some crossovers early on, the character hasn't really appeared since, nor have any other properties related to it. Arguably the most lasting impact was the team name Exiles, which was repurposed for an X-Men spin-off book. But that is a dubious connection at best. Now, I have to stop and wonder how obscure the character is. Prime was a part of a Saturday morning cartoon back in the day, but that was the style of the time and much the way the movies are now. I was the exact demographic for that show, so I remember it, but I have no idea if anyone who wasn't my exact age at that exact moment, if this would have registered for them at all. Anyway, what was interesting about the character was that it was a double down on the youth in the body of a god concept that Shazam skirted. He was a 13-year-old boy, so he had a very particular view of the world. He had a good heart, but he was still learning how to relate. And over the course of the comic, it showed. He was ostracized for being into girls that were his own age. He tried to go after bad guys like pedophiles, but failed to provide evidence to pursue it legally, so he was perceived to be a monster attacking people. It didn't take long for him to go through a rebellious phase, but eventually he came to understand the responsibility of his powers, how he was expected to be a more stalwart and thoughtful figure because of them. After all, ultimately few things were a real threat to the world's strongest Ultra, and he matured into the line's real hero. Before I go, I do want to talk about the aesthetics of the character. A wonderful detail is that Prime is a muscle-bound 90s cliche of a superhero on purpose. He made himself look like the heroes in the books that were out at the time because he controlled his own appearance, and he was a 13-year-old boy who was into those comic books. The rest of the art didn't look like this, and it supported the introspective element of the book, looking at the nature of the comic book medium and how it influences young men. In this regard, Prime was a wonderfully metatextual example of a superhero who handled the dichotomy of the big masculine super figures presented and the target demographic of the young boy readers very well.